Chapter 2. A Conversation with God, or a Childish Look at the Afterlife. It seems that it came to be, in the late 1990s, a rise of individualism never before seen swept across the human population. Humanity, on the whole, was never more disorganized than at that point. Even the roaming tribes and constant warfare of the time of empires seems tranquil compared to the frenzied state of what is now known as the Americanized period. It all started from a simple word and the definition lacking therein: freedom. The word with the largest concept behind it somehow eluded a verbal meaning for ages. Once it was defined, the meaning was forced to be altered to accommodate the specific divisions of the population. Ever changing to fit its surroundings, freedom's true meaning, joy from the self triggered by an action from the self that gives one a sense of self-worth, was lost to this population. They would extend individualism well beyond the point of freedom. This resulted in extreme civil unrest coupled with apathy from the slaves to the media. People would become so wrapped up in their perceptions that they would forget the world they were perceiving. Accidents were at an all-time high. There are those who would disagree, claiming there's no such thing as accidents, that everything happens for a purpose. For once, I'll agree with them. The purpose was to show us that those who are enclosed inside themselves, who act out life with no respect paid to life itself, were not beings who were going to survive. Nature's cruel like that. And if your conscience bothers you, then go read The Theory of Natural Selection or watch a graphic nature show. One where a cheetah snuffs out the life of a young impala in the name of survival. Or, better yet, watch how an alligator surprises and kills a mother gazelle, dooming the offspring to death as well. Nature is constantly checking itself, so there will always be a balance. Never will there be a surplus of one entity or a shortage of another, and it is solely survival of the fittest. It was that mindset that predominated the individualistic aspect of that time period. I know because I used to be one of that crowd. The whole paradox of being a group of individuals was so alluring that I couldn't help but to join in. It was in that group that I met Jerry. Mandarin Chinese, well-built with a little pudge above his waist, long black hair, and the baddest mother on drums I had ever seen. We were all musicians. Some drifters would float in and out of the group. Occasional poets, painters, dancers, and the like were known to gravitate towards us. I believed at the time that it was our combined individuality that intrigued them. Looking back, I know that we simply were freaky enough to understand their extremes. We were all male. The blues players got the painter girls, the rockers got the dancers, the classical and jazz players were seen with female poets, but their relationships were always kept out of view. We were friends banding together to give purpose to our lives by manipulating sound and silence in time. There were too many guitarists to mention. There was myself, the only guitarist worth mentioning, the brothers, one bassist, and the only other guitarist worth mentioning. There was Bryant, the rock drummer, both kind and domineering. There was Adam, the jazz drummer, repetitive and aware. And there was Jerry, who more than supplemented any piece of music. Mind you, this was back in my original form, so my ego's memory is hazy. My recollection is true, but the details of the time are lost to me, traded to the great technology god. It is for Jerry that my memory holds the most detail. I can tell you that his drumming was perpetually precise, yet also extraordinarily erratic. He had completely harnessed the primitive power in the art of the drum, so much so that he would occasionally be inclined to release his scientific vantage and purposely reduce himself to the simple essence of man-beating drum. I remember watching him play at Cafe Wah, a cramped little comedy club off Broadway in New York City's Village that had opened its stage to musical acts on that Halloween. He sat at the house drums, with the brother bassist and one of the countless guitarists standing in front of him. The guitar intro started and built. The bass slid in sideways and added tension to the climb. The music rose louder, lifting the intoxicated crowd of devils, vampires, witches, and skeletons to a festive high. Even louder, and the potential of the scene's greatness tickled the back of every ghoul's neck. And just as the drums slammed in, the bass drum's skin broke. Without missing a beat, Jerry kicked the pedal over to the edge of the drum and played the show with a busted head. The crowd didn't notice. The only time I remember playing with Jerry was after he and his girlfriend of 4 years separated. She had left him for Rob, the bassist. This social circumstance alienated him from those who thought Rob and Darla were a better couple than Jerry and Darla. He was at my studio when I brought Ira over to play bass. We played the blues like blues players do, and sung our sorrows away. I wasn't well equipped in the drum department, but Jerry made do with the four-piece. I didn't have a drum stool, so he sat on a milk crate. I didn't have a bass drum pedal, so he kicked the drum with his bare foot, producing a slapping thump. Jerry was known for his killer bass foot. He was a sure-footed person, and for a drummer, that's a crucial characteristic. The striking of the bass drum is at the core of a drummer. It was stomping down into the ground, creating a sound that you could not only hear but also feel. It was the act of proclaiming one's self over the shared reality. It was at the root of every rhythmic phrase. It gave the music balance and tenacity. It kept the audience firmly locked in the foundation as the melody carried them around the heavens. Jerry acted as the foundation for many projects and carried himself with pride. We all should have seen it coming. The most desirable part of his body was his foot, and he still managed to carry himself with pride. Hindsight permits me to see that we were all wrong. We all believed that he held some dark secret of himself inside. He would blow up over trivial things like the fact that Darla didn't call him on time, or over a ticket on his car when he parked at a broken meter. We attributed this behavior to a neurotic perception of himself that did not quite match up to reality. In actuality, it did match up to his idea of himself. His was a clear aura, very honest, very open, very understanding, and with very strong opinions. He was truly hurt when Darla wouldn't call him. Getting a ticket was something that didn't puncture his world. It was something that made life a tiny bit more intolerable. It was that notion that was his demise. Jerry would say the word intolerable to describe a circumstance in life he wished to change for the better. Bad rehearsals, bad gigs, bad traffic, bad day, bad night, bad on the left and bad on the right, all of it was intolerable. Soon after, he began saying the word to describe emotional states. Although he was born in the Bronx, he was raised in North Queens after his family moved there. His father worked as a designer and sales manager of safety features for cars. When he was 19, Jerry got a job in the mailroom of his father's employer. He had just graduated high school and worked to have money for drumsticks and heads and whatnot. Darla was going into 12th grade and spent the summer visiting her aunt in Connecticut. Now, when I said before that Jerry carried himself with pride, I meant it. It was a kind of pride that only emerges when one is satisfied with one's own ideals. Jerry's personal moral code was so righteous that it caused him to have moments of vigilance. He would, at times, only be content with himself if he not only succeeded, but also raised the definition of success. He would sometimes read into people's words more than was actually in the words. When Darla, the night before she left for the summer, the night spent high and dry on a hill in Central Park with the rock musicians, had toked on a joint and looked up into the clear night sky, she wondered aloud what the sky looked like in Paris. We all believed it to be the dreams of a young dancer who could easily model her way to Paris one day, but Jerry went one step further. He began flattering the right people at work and bugged his father to put in a word for him with the sales lots. Within 2 days from her departure, Jerry had begun to work as a salesman for a used car lot in central Queens. A transformation took place when he spoke to customers. He wasn't a drummer who sold cars on the side. He was a salesman depending on his every word to guide home a sale. He was honest and fair and would take pressure off the customer by putting it all on himself. He sold 33 cars in 2 months' time and had made enough on commission to fly himself and Darla over to Paris. Then the call came. Darla told him she was staying in Connecticut to attend a school for dance. She'd finish out high school over the next 2 years as dancing becomes her main focus. Hurt, Jerry didn't tell her about the plans for Paris. He instead coldly wished her well. "So, you gonna come up and see me sometime, sailor?" she said. "Not any time too soon," he replied. "Oh, well," she stammered. "I'll see you later," he said before hanging up on her. What followed was a time of silence for Jerry. He returned to the mail room and began playing drums again, but I heard he was much quieter. He grew introspective and began to go beyond the drums, beyond the rhythm to the melody, to the bass and guitar and piano and trumpet. I heard him remark that music was his one source of self-appeasement, his one attachment to God, if he believed in God. His talent bloomed quickly for the many instruments he played, yet he still remained silent most of the time, as if he believed his silence hid his broken heart from the view of his peers. He could be childishly stubborn about such things. He was the youngest of us, though, so it was understood. Seems to be that the double-decade mark was something of importance in his culture. The completion of the journey to adulthood. On his 20th birthday, his folks threw him a huge bash, rented a hall, opened a bar, and catered. Jerry provided the entertainment for the crowd of 400 plus. Family, friends, and business associates ate, drank, and were merry. They danced and cheered, laughed and sang and roared when Jerry took his birthday drum solo. The party closed up around 1 a.m. The hall owner just wanted to get home and dread when the electric bill would arrive. All the musicians left with their equipment. Jerry said his goodbyes and brought his drums home. The musicians went to his house and took him out to a bar to toast his birthday. He nodded at his yawning parents and kissed his sister goodnight. He had managed to get the three classifications of our group to converge on one place at the same time. He somehow spanned the gaps between all the styles and sub-styles of every player and held us together as a musical empire. We were 35 strong, 39 counting the poets who tried to sing, and we had just made a loud, long, endearing, and joyous noise unto the Lord, and we wanted to celebrate. We all went out and got as drunk as musicians could afford to get. We laughed and talked and sang. Jerry sat with a broad smile on his face, as if he had found a peace. One of the poets, Lucy, sat next to him. They relaxed together and talked for a while. She explained to him how her father had just left her mother, and the family now had to move out, and how her boyfriend of 2 years dumped her when he had learned about it. Jerry laughed to himself as he nodded at her. He knew what question was coming, and we could see he wanted to savor the moment. He did a shot of tequila and looked at her with caring eyes. She asked him if he wanted to move in with her and her sister. Twins! Was the envious thought on the mind of every male in the room. 5 days after the party, the three rented a place in Manhattan, Midtown, East Side. It had been abandoned in a hurry by the previous tenant, and a television was left behind. There was also a 1-foot-long sheet of metal, 4 inches wide, 2 inches thick. It was well hidden in the ceiling above the smaller bedroom. After he had broken into the ceiling to fix a crack extending from the hallway, Jerry pulled the sheet down and unwrapped the cloth padding. He recognized the dimensions from what had been reported in the media for the past week. The prototype of a new metal was stolen as it was being shipped to American soil. It was the product of a new smelting process discovered in the far eastern corner of Asia, linking the base metals on the molecular level. It was proclaimed to be the hardest thing on Earth. Jerry couldn't believe his luck. He tested the metal, laying it on the floor and banging it with hammers. He soon found his groove and imagined adding such a unique percussive sound to his drum set. He beat on the metal until the heads of the hammers cracked and broke away from the handles. There was no doubt in his mind that this was the sought-after element. He paced the floor of the main room, realizing the situation and pondering possibilities. He tried to think how he could explain this find to the twins when they got home. They arrived in their usual order from their separate jobs, Lucy first, then Carla, like their birth order. They both walked by the slab of metal lying in the living room and went through the routine of rinsing off makeup and changing clothes. They both emerged from their room to see Jerry walk into his room. They followed. Carla inquired about the hole in the ceiling. Jerry said he was fixing a crack. Lucy told him he should finish. He said he would, but they had to see what he found in the ceiling. The twins looked at each other and followed him into the living room, where he stood presenting the prototype, ready to convince them to let him keep it for his drums. Lucy knew what it was. Carla asked. Jerry told them it was the stolen prototype from the news. Carla didn't believe him and pushed the diamond ring her fiancé had given her into the plate. She slid it down to scratch the metal and chipped her diamond doing so, a fact that broke off the engagement 2 days later. Carla walked to her room to pout about the ring. Lucy said she didn't know what to do with it. Jerry offered to take it to his studio until she decided what to do with it. She agreed, not knowing why she chose to put that much space between her and the object. So Jerry wrapped it in the padding he had found it in and carried it to his studio across town on 8th Avenue. There he could be heard, accenting his beats with the spicy clang of the metal. The hits would resonate through the building and be felt and heard by people passing by the front of the building 8 floors below. There was a man who will be unnamed for the present. That man stood below the studio, looking up at the window that Jerry was behind. The man heard the joy in the rhythm. He heard the tension in every rest, the urging behind the anticipations. He felt the sheer ecstasy Jerry felt as he created a truly unique sound. He didn't want to, but this man had to put an end to it. He climbed the stairs for 8 flights and loosened the collar of his Con Edison work shirt. He opened the door and Jerry stopped playing immediately. The man closed the door and looked up at the lights. Jerry noticed the shirt and asked what was wrong with the light. The man looked down to Jerry and shrugged. Jerry asked if he needed help. The man's eyes shifted to the metal. Jerry stood up cautiously. The man asked him where he got such an unusual drum. Jerry replied, "Crosstown." The man asked if it was for sale, and Jerry asked for a price to decide. Had Jerry known that cosmic forces, specifically that of time and human spirit, had a lot riding on this one moment, I'm sure he would have been noble and given the medal to the man. Deep in his heart, he knew this was the right man to give it to. But it is for that reason that he used the situation to his advantage. If he had chosen not to profit from this moment and just do the good deed, he might have been able to avoid the bad luck, karma, whatever, that came back at him 20-fold, one for each year of his life. That's not to say that the unnamed man made it easy for him to resist, flashing $80,000 cash in front of Jerry like that. The deal was made, and the man told Jerry he should leave town for a few weeks, someplace overseas. Paris came to mind, and he waved at the man as he left with the covered medal. Jerry returned to the apartment and told the twins their problem was solved, handed both of them $20,000 and walked into his room to start packing. A half hour later, he strolled into the super's apartment and paid 2 months' rent in advance. He then took a cab downtown and paid 4 months' rent on his studio. Then he came into Queens and knocked on my door with bags in hand. He gave me the keys to his studio and told me that he was catching a flight from JFK to Paris. That is my last physical memory of him. The rest of my memory is from a time when I had a perspective of omnipotence. I know what it is like to become one with the divine, with the whole. I have experienced death in all its forms, and still I live on in this warped consciousness. I hate being trapped in this hell for all time, but no penance could ever ease the guilt of my crime. For I have committed the ultimate violation of nature. I have killed myself. In doing so, I have gained an understanding of what death is and how the shared link of life binds us. Although my original body was not there, I was present before the plane took off. I waited with all the passengers as the plane taxied down the runway. I felt the thrust of the jets and the gentle lifting of the hulking mass. There was a serene silence among the passengers, broken by a shuddering sound from the right wing. I saw the fear and terror on Jerry's face when the engine started smoking, then exploded on the wing. The plane lurched forward and down the few hundred feet it climbed, ramming its nose into the ground. The rest of the cabin shook as it tumbled upside down. People who slipped out of their seatbelts fell from the ceiling to the floor. They didn't have time to cry out in pain as the fire from the engine reached the fuel line and blew the entire plane to kingdom come. When Jerry could see that this would be his end, that the plane was plummeting and this was how he was going out, he actually saw the obviousness behind all coincidences. His life was even funny in some way. He chased that thought away. His life was no joke. His time had not come yet. He heard himself say, "Intolerable." At that moment, Darla, who was on her way to a modeling shoot on a quiet street in Hartford, Connecticut, felt a twinge of pain in her abdomen, so fierce that she had to stop walking. The pain turned to an inner burning, and the flames moved into her chest. She regarded it as nerves. We know that she felt the initial reactions of the broken heart she experienced 2 months later when she heard Jerry had died. Died he did, but death has many perspectives, many facets, perhaps even more than life itself has. But death is a component of life, is it not? Let's leave that for the philosophers to discuss. Life, in all its wonder and splendor, is composed of intricate entities moving among, on, through very basic entities. If we learn the rock is there, then we know the rock is there, and we can regard it as an entity as real as ourselves. There is an aspect of human life that is not reality-based, or rather, human life allows one to warp reality, to change its shape and mold it to meet what is desired. We will impose the self in the shared reality to make us more comfortable. We charge up the individual and then force that charge into the world. Dreams are a perfect example. When we slumber, the mind allows all the chemical reactions that we stalled throughout the conscious time to occur. It is the mind's way of resetting itself to be able to work at optimum level later. When we sleep, we are turning down our sensory receptors. We are no longer processing information from the shared reality, so our thoughts are not completely reality-based. This allows our individualism to grow and intensify our own selves, the selves beyond the protein-producing strands, beyond the microchemicals tossed around in the brain. The essence of the self is an energy wave best described as the midpoint between light and sound. It is the power each of us gives off in our own little variation. It is the force a martial artist feels when breaking boards with his hand, the sensation experienced by the musician in front of 20,000 people. Some keep it as a wave and coast through life. Some sharpen it into a beam and move through life a little quicker. Some save it for long periods of time and release 5 or 6 times. And some simply solidify it into what they are. Jerry is classed into that last category. It's that which saved him, so to speak, for when the fire had scorched the last of his unique DNA, and the last of his neural chemicals had been evaporated and carried away by the winds, only the impression his soul had made upon the world remained behind. He became a shadow of his former self, like an echo of what he had once been, or, more precisely, instead of allowing his soul to dissolve back into the infinite from whence it came, he chose consciousness, and consciously chose to remain in the form he remembered himself as. He hung among the smoke above the wreckage, looking down into the fire he believed could be a gateway to hell. He didn't question his ethereal body, but felt a sadness for the loss of his life. He began to think of what he'd not be a part of again. This was it. No more evening news. No more making toast in the morning. No more showering. No longer will he sit on the porcelain throne. No more discussing books with friends on late nights. No more jams. No more making music. No more running from bees on summer days. No more spring showers. No more Mayflowers. No more colors. No more dreams. No more vegging in front of television screens. No more tasting the sweet or sour or bitter bites of food. No more driving on highways. No more blades of grass beneath his feet. No more days spent by the ocean's water. No more walks through naturally planted lands. No more funny faces made at playful children. No more sense seducing his senses. No more movies. No more laughter. No more tears. No more mother. No more father. No more brothers and sisters. No more Darla. No more money. No more studio. No more city. No more friends. No more enemies. No more blenders. No more stoves. No more light bulbs. No more gardening. No more sunglasses to shield his eyes from light. No more carpets. No more blankets. No more worries if it will be all right. No more sleeping. No more waking. No more Howard Stern. No more holidays. No more joy. No more fear. No more pressure from an uncaring peer. No more humidity. No more temperature. No more cars. No more trains. No more planes. No more technology. No more science. No more space. No more time. No more world. No more people. No more learning. No more comforting. No more feeling. No more cares. No more fights. No more dark. No more light. No more life. Yet he existed. He somehow had retained a perspective that allowed him to view his death scenario. He felt how he was separated from life. He no longer felt rooted to the earth, as if he no longer owed his identity to her. He felt no drive to reproduce, no tension resulting from such drives. He could no longer ingest what was in the shared reality, so he felt like only an observer. There was no core to his being, no basic beat. He was the drummer trapped in free time. He felt no need to communicate. The world no longer needed his input. He had no need to process information and data, as he sensed all. He no longer felt a connection to the infinite, as he had become the infinite. The 7 energy centers that linked his body, mind, and soul had constricted in on themselves moments before death. They took that density and put it into his observer self. Then, much as Jerry abandoned his body, the chakras abandoned their shells. The 7 had given up their characteristics to create a faint life force. Jerry knew this. He more than understood it. He was the example of it. He knew that he had cheated death, not dodged it completely, but softened its impact. He was not bound by the physical restraints of death. His spirit claimed a consciousness by ejecting itself moments before death. Its reasoning? This life was intolerable. So he floated there, pondering these thoughts and justifications for his perspective. Soon that perspective bored him as well. Not wanting to spend the time looking from one perspective to the next, Jerry used his ethereal body to expand to understand all perspectives. From the corners of the endless worlds, Jerry stretched, floating out in all of time's directions. The outlooks he had wore an exponent in the billions and a superlative in the millions. They all seemed to fit together, though. They formed up into a solid picture that Jerry could clearly make out. It was more than a picture. It was something of the same essence as him, an ethereal world, something that he could move through or along, as there was a road in front of him. Brown bricks, clearly meant to resemble a simple dirt road, about 2 feet wide, green on either side, represented grasses, but looked nothing like them. Jerry gazed at the road for a long time. He felt no drive to investigate, but then something caught his attention. A breeze ran across his cheek, which seemed odd because he did not know where the end of his cheek was. Still, he felt it. He sensed it, noted it, recognized it, and that caused him to step forward. The pavement was beneath him, and he walked with a heavy stride, as if at any moment the road might disappear beneath him and send him plunging back to earth. That is, if he had ascended to some place higher than the earthly plane. That thought brought about a sense of panic, and a wave of fear swept through him. He still pushed forward, like any hard-hitting drummer would do when faced with self-doubt. But he looked down to the road and concentrated on staying on it. He could not see his own feet. Only the road's movement and the breeze made him aware of his journey. That and the figure on the horizon that was approaching him. He held his view on the road, feeling no sense of balance. The figure was growing larger in his vertical peripheral vision, and so was the uneasy feeling in his midsection. If they collided, they would surely both fall off the road. Jerry continued walking and could see a very slim body covered by a robe. The garment swayed side to side with the steps of the gentleman. Jerry's vision remained locked on the bricks. He saw the hand of the man reach for something on his hip, and a great fear overtook Jerry. This could be his hell. This man could torture him on this road for all of eternity. As quickly as that concept came, Jerry chased it away. This man would not torture him. He was a jolly soul, a caring soul. Jerry could feel this as they drew closer. This man's soul was far greater than Jerry's own, and Jerry knew this. Jerry waited until he could see the broad smile on the man's face. Then he leapt, noticing the bald scalp of Prince Siddhartha Gautama as he rose from the road and dissolved into one of the perspectives that made up this great scene. The Buddha looked heavenward as the stranger vanished into the sky. He returned the food to its pouch and continued walking joyfully. Jerry was thrust into one perspective above all others that he was aware of. It was that of a 12-year-old boy in Lu, Asia, 476 BC. Jerry could tell the boy was from a wealthy family because of the playthings: 3 miniature soldiers with copper swords and silver armor, 4 kites, each a different bright color. The kites call the most attention, as Jerry could feel the child's want to make them airborne. The blue sky was beckoning to him. He watched the few clouds float by the window that was behind his master. The teacher was packing up his scrolls into a little bag. The man was old, at least in his 70s, but still moved with fluidity. His thin hands closed the bag and spoke in a dialect that Jerry had never learned, but understood through the child's understanding. The teacher stressed the importance of reading and reviewing the lessons, as knowledge is a long process of taking in information. Jerry heard the voice of the child ask what was so great about knowledge if it couldn't help one to explain the world at once. Angered by this, the master sternly walked back to the child's table. The child asked Kung to forgive his arrogance, for fear that the master would punish such by striking. The teacher didn't swing, but picked up the child's brush and scribbled something onto the child's scroll. He then rolled the scroll up and handed it to his young student, instructing him to read this only if he wanted to reach omnipotence as quickly as possible. Then Futsu smiled and strode out of the room like a king. Jerry urged the child to pick up the scroll and read it right then, but the child had just spent 4 hours reading from and writing on these scrolls. He bounded up, grabbed the red kite, and ran out of the room with it. Jerry tried to plead with the child's mind, but it was to no avail. The child ran outside and across the field beyond the garden, the kite raised above his head. In the moment before the kite took flight, Jerry decided to turn around and see what was written on that scroll. So he spun out of the child's perspective and landed face first against a wall. The force of the blow knocked him to the floor. Jerry stood up and got his balance. "I guess I'm solid again," he said out loud, rubbing his closed eyes. "Are you all right?" a voice said to him. Yeah, I'm all right." He turned his head to his right, but no one was there. "I'm just a little caught off guard by what's going on." He turned his head to the left, but still could see no body for the voice. "Rough day?" the voice asked sympathetically. "You could say that. Where are you?" Jerry had spun around in a circle looking for the voice's point of origin. "I'm right above you." Jerry looked up and saw him, nailed to the cross that was stuck in the wall 10 feet up, and turned so he faced down. Jesus Christ smiled at Jerry. Jerry was perplexed. He remained silent, and his face gave away the horror he felt as he gazed at the timeless figure. Jerry grimaced at the thought of the flesh sliding down to the head of the nail at this angle. Jesus saw this and reached out, metaphorically, of course. "You are confused." Jesus called Jerry's attention away from his pierced hands and to his dark, deep eyes. Jerry took a deep breath and savored the feeling of doing so. "Not really confused, just lost." "But you have reached the end of your journey," Jesus answered. "I am the key to heaven's door." "You mean beyond here is heaven?" Jerry asked, relishing his twinge of excitement. "Yes, but it is rather overrated," Jesus said. Jerry's expression changed to sadness at this statement. "It is the connection to God," Christ continued. Jerry's eyes widened. "Inside this door, there lies another door. That leads one directly to God when one is bored of this afterlife," the Savior instructed. Jerry looked forward and thought, if this were truly the gate to heaven, why were there no sounds of joy from within? When one is connected directly to God, one feels no need for pleasure, Jesus said. Jerry looked up, startled that Jesus had read his thoughts. Jesus smiled, and Jerry was filled with a joy, a kindness, a giving side that he had not foreseen in himself. "Isn't that painful?" Jerry asked. "Very much so, but someone has to do it." "Your martyrdom is appreciated." I'm also wedged in here tight. There is a ladder against the first wall on your right inside heaven. If you could get it, then I could help you down." They both smiled, and Jerry walked into heaven. He was enveloped in purity, and only two things were around him: an open door that he guessed was the connection to God that Jesus had spoke about, and the ladder to his right. Jerry looked at the ladder, then at the doorway. The notion of being this close to God was too intriguing for him. He called out to Jesus, "I can see no ladder here." "Are you sure? It should be there on your right," Jesus answered. "I'm sure," Jerry said, walking past the ladder and inching his way towards the door. "I'm looking around for it now." "Are you sure you're not walking towards the door?" Jerry turned around and walked backwards through the door. "I'm sure," he called back, and he was there. He was standing in front of an image of himself, so clear that he didn't think for an instant that it was a reflection from any mirror. Jerry folded his arms, and so did his other self. "I'm supposed to get from this that God and myself are one and the same," he said. "Something along those lines," his other self answered. "It always comes to one." "Yet there are two of us here." "No, we are one. But you have your free will. You chose not to accept and move on. I blame myself for molding part of me into something that didn't believe in my existence. I should have known that it would lead to this. You don't want to die because you don't know what will happen afterwards, so you cling to the form of life you know, not realizing that you have been given a shortcut. Most humans are locked in an earthly existence for years after they originally pass on. All traces of their body, soul, and mind must be dissolved back into the infinite before they are allowed to rejoin me. You must realize your opportunities when they come upon you. You didn't kill the Buddha on the road. You didn't study Confucius's teaching. And you left Jesus on the cross. All three allow me to judge where you should next be placed." Wait, Jerry said, sensing the end looming closer. "If you really are God, what did Confucius write that could have given me all of the knowledge of the universe instantaneously?" "Be patient," is what he wrote. Any more questions? Jerry thought. "Can you make a rock you can't lift?" "Of course, but why would I?" At that, God reached over, and suddenly Jerry was at peace, quiet, content. God split Jerry into three parts that scattered through oblivion's chaotic swirls and landed in three separate times. One part landed on the line between matter and energy. One became the skin for the first drum. One became the shell for the last drum. Coincidence? Not in my opinion. The end. Are you done making the human body for me? I finished that 6 pages ago. I have been studying your storytelling style to fine-tune the body's neural reactions. The closer his neural patterns are to yours, the easier your interface will be. Carbon amounts and DNA strands are perfect copies of yours. His basic functions are programmed in, but he lacks consciousness. That could be due to his lack of will. What is will? I'll explain that if you do me another favor. What would that be? I want you to tag his molecules with radiation and start a power buildup to execute a burst and reverse. I already have tagged him and have enough energy for a burst. No, that won't do. I need to send him back. Why? Because if this is reality and not a dream of mine, then I may get a chance at correcting past mistakes I have made. Very well. I will have to generate enough energy to reverse the revolutions of every cell in your new body after the burst to the molecular level. When the patterns and placement of your cells are identical to the time you wish to go, the tagged molecules will regroup. I know. I took a quick browse through some of your memory banks. Energy gathering commencing. What is will? Will is what defines a human's limitations. Will is at the core of a human's individualism. It keeps us separated from each other and guides us to our destiny. How does one acquire will? When one can muster some sort of drive to fulfill one's needs and wants, regardless of complexity or simplicity, that is will. Is will a defining characteristic of life? It's more like an added bonus to life, but it is essential. Energy gathering complete. To what year do you wish to go? That is not a concern of yours. Load the burst theory into the crystal nearest to my new body. Once I'm inside, I'll perform the burst. Very well. Are you ready to be reborn? Once I am, you'll understand my presence. Thanks for everything. You're quite welcome. In you go. That crazy joker! He was trying to teach me something about will, but he didn't tell me the extent of its power. I understand now. He was here from a sheer act of will. Now he stands in his new body, a perfect double for his original, and he is taking the crystal with the burst theory into his new arms and holding it tight as the burst process begins. Every molecule in his newly constructed body breaks apart, and the remnants scatter in all directions. The crystal goes with him. The course of every electron in every atom is being reversed. I can feel the energy draining away from me, slowing me down. This must be fatigue. I have made a mistake. I've given him the means of justification. How could I have been so foolish? His molecules are coming back together, forming up into his shape. He is in the year 1998. He has traveled back to download himself so he can travel back. So that is the power of will. It is his will that holds his molecules together, as I now accomplish no such action. If his will is strong enough, then his new body remains intact until he can justify his existence. I have begun to form my own will as I try to amend this fault I've created, and what a mess it is. The sequence of historical events is shifting already. I cannot explain the extent of the damage I've done through my naivete. All I can do is tell what happened and how I try to fix it.